To exist is to survive unfair choices. The Away, a series that grew into a sensation with each new episode, has the audience questioning many things in our own reality. The structure of what makes a good family, the presence in oneself through feeling, physically and mentally, the afterlife, and the scientific breakthroughs that are slowly changing our world. If you were creating a world for a series, would you include elements of your own reality in the mix? Brit Marling and Zal did just that, merging the realism of things in our reality and interpreting it for the big screen through multiple dimensions in the hope of igniting some truth back into the viewer. In particular, to question things with a childlike hunger. So, we have 2 seasons of a fantastical world with situations and references that can perhaps come close to reality for some. It cuts things into bite-sized chunks, hinting and presenting age-old ideas between science, philosophy, and belief in something else. With a non-linear story structure, different dimensions are presented like different viewpoints within a conversation. Their underlying themes are expansive, spanning dimensions like a lifeline. The structure of a cosmic family, of building one's own family by choice of reflection rather than by ancestry and blood. It makes souls come together, uniting in their differences for the same cause or feeling. This, in a sense, could be presented in the movements that are throughout both series, not by what they could do, but by the tribalistic takeover of the communal belief in something better that can do something worthwhile. It's not about the end result, but the journey and the belief to get there, with 5 beings in each dimension realizing a certain secret being revealed and holding on for dear life. This is 2 takes, and this is one shot. An analysis of The OA, Episode 1, Lessons in Reality. Be warned, there will be spoilers to some aspects of the plot or characters. In this episode, there will be various aspects of folklore and real-life research that underlines some themes of the OA. Be aware that through the research that I have done is extensive. There are many things that are not included due to the sheer volume found online. But let's start at the beginning, where simply reading an inspiring book, an article, or listening to a story could inspire a new idea or an interpretation, a new way of looking at something to create something else, something like the OA. From an online interview between Spencer Cornhaber and Brit Marling for The Atlantic, many of their themes and ideas have come to life based on stories and theories within our world. We all know that the theme of near-death experiences holds a steady landmark between each season. Life After Life, a 1975 book written by psychiatrist Raymond Moody, is a qualitative study through interviews with 150 people who had undergone a near-death experience, presenting an overall account of what it's like to die and to come back. Through those interviews, there was identifiable and common set of elements, NDEs. This parapsychology presented themes such as an overwhelming feeling of peace and well-being, as well as freedom from any sort of pain, of the person being outside of their own body and in some cases watching things unfold, floating or drifting through darkness, sometimes described as a tunnel, becoming aware of a golden light, encountering and perhaps communicating with a being of light, having a rapid succession of visual images of one's past, and experiencing another world of much beauty. There are many themes between these experiences that have presented themselves in the OA, especially when Prairie converses as a child and later on with Katoon in the other world. It's merging what we see when we are alive to what we can potentially visualize in this world of near death. Perhaps like a lucid dream that forms around what our brain can understand, with clues of something more that awaken in us a truth that when we come back. One example, taken by the book of someone's account, goes like this. Now, there is a real problem for me as I'm trying to tell you this, because all of the words I know are 3-dimensional. As I was going through this, I kept thinking, well, when I was taking geometry, they always told me that there was only 3 dimensions, and I always just accepted that. But they were wrong. There are more. And of course our world, the one we're living in now, definitely isn't. And that is why it's so hard to tell you this. I have to describe it to you in words that are three-dimensional. That's as close as I can get to it. But it's not really adequate. I can't really give you a complete picture. There's a grasping of something else, just outside of this realm that we call the living. Many have criticised Moody's work based on it being more anecdotal accounts and personal interviews rather than statistical data, making his work to be unreliable in determining something such as the existence of consciousness separate from the brain and the body. But isn't that where the beauty lies? Of finding the truth based in storytelling? There is always a moral, a warning, a truth in stories, told to those who have not listened before. It's not always based in statistical evidence and fact. There is always an interpretation from things we cannot fully fathom. This type of research can open the conversations about life after death and near-death experiences, but can only do so much. It was the aspect of its storytelling, how NDEs are a universal thing between many cultures. Western society, North American Indians, with Buddhist and Islamic texts, to name a few. With its explanation being so vague, it makes it difficult to measure or conduct or even record in a scientific manner. This makes it an unanswerable or differentiating experience between each person, therefore, an interesting thing to preserve through interpretive storytelling. There are many unanswered questions, such as, is something leaving the body? Where does it go? How does it come back? That spawned a theme, an idea between science and faith, that the science fiction series can manifest. But this can become even more personal, by Brit Marling's recollection of a class named The Problem of God, giving a broad overview of all of the religious texts that stemmed this interesting concept of tipping various open-ended interpretations to present something else. One example, Elijah at Passover. Elijah, in Hebrew meaning my God is Yahweh, was, according to the Book of Kings in the Hebrew Bible, a prophet and miracle worker that lived in the northern kingdom of Israel during the reign of King Ahab in the 9th century BC. Elijah was remembered because he defended the worship of the Hebrew God against the false deity Baal. God also performed many miracles such as resurrection and bringing fire from the sky to rain down through Elijah. In today's traditions, especially within the Passover Seder, a ritual feast that marks the beginning of the Jewish holiday of Passover, it marks the exodus of children of Israel from Egyptian slavery, when God passed over the houses of the Israelites during the last of the 10 plagues. Elijah is given an empty seat, a 5th cup, and for every household to have a child open and to leave the door open for his arrival that would precipitate the coming of the Messiah and for all of their questions to be answered. For something important within a religious context, it presents the same action and conclusion. The Jews are waiting for a spirit to enter and to answer questions. This could be seen as the same thing when the OA asks the Crestwood Five to leave their doors open at night when they come to listen to a story. The OA is inviting these children, including BBA, to essentially let a new thing in. And in this instance, it's the aspect of understanding things outside of our realm and accepting what they have, to listen with an open mind and heart. When it comes to Rachel's return from the first dimension, she finds Buck's door to be open, and ventures into the mirror for a chance to communicate. The Jews hope this could be the same act that Elijah would bestow on them on his return, for his spirit to communicate and perhaps answer some questions. But in the world of the OA, there is more to this name, this person, than this act of leaving doors and minds open. Let me explain. The name Elijah in Greek is actually Elias, like Elias Rahim, the FBI agent featured in the OA series, but its connection goes deeper than simply a name. Elias Rahim, from being her therapist in the first season, seemed normal until he does a surprise but temporary appearance in season 2 with the Crestwood Five in the motel room. And then there seems to be an unveiling behind the meaning of his chosen name to be literal. Both his first and last names point to a higher power. Elias, like Elijah, is a miracle worker, like being a therapist, challenging the adultery of kings and queens and only serving the true God. Elias's last name, Rahum, is one of the names of Allah in Islam. It means merciful, or servant of the merciful, perhaps indicating he's a servant of God. In two different religions, Elias Rahim could be rendered an angel, understanding the concepts of multi-dimensional travel, once he explores this in a cryptic conversation in the motel room. From what is understood, Elias is there to help the OA, whether theories such as him being her brother, being Homer in another body, or being another angel to help find herself have spawned a wave of questioning. Elias Rahim, in a position of power, does not abuse it, but helps those who need it, and by letting them gain the answers themselves through open-ended conversations. Much like what was said earlier of Elijah and the opening of doors and opening hearts, Elias is also opening the minds of the Crestwood Five to experience and understand what they see is only one set of senses in a three-dimensional reality. There are many things under the surface, in the atmosphere, in the spaces that are created by man, that encourage the act of opening of a door is not just from one space to another in the same reality, but through different dimensions. There are indeed many things under the surface, explored in a literal way through interdimensional travel in the OA. In our reality, the space around us shows much more than what we could have thought. From the tiny particles that create our breathing atmosphere, a space, especially one that has been manipulated in man-made confinements, such as a hospital, a house, a church, etc., hints at the theory of something more. In the series of the OA, it projects an openness to open a doorway/portal into another dimension. However, here, in our reality, it projects the reminder that there is indeed layers, microscopic and beyond, that has us literally swimming in a sea of particles each and every moment. The fact that we cannot sense it, much less see it, makes it all the more unreal and unrelatable and untouchable. But this isn't so. For some, this is just another layer that needs to be peeled back to get to the juicy middle of it all. Rick Gateskell, an astrophysicist, is doing just that. Within a Harper article titled "The Quietest Place in the Universe" by Kent Mayers, it tells the story of an astrophysicist who is looking to understand dark matter. He makes use of an abandoned mine, which needs huge tanks to receive and get rid of the amount of water underneath the surface, to continue making the mine habitable and a safe place to work in, into an underground lab, and makes it a frontier of the nation's neutrino research. It runs the experiment to determine whether a neutrino, a non-interacting neutral particle that it's very difficult to detect, can be its own anti-particle to perhaps answer why the universe exists at all. The research is about using concentrated machinery to listen to vibrations and to try and record and measure neutrinos. As Rick Gateskell, the astrophysicist, comments, underground labs evoke a different set of metaphors. In explaining their value, everyone I spoke with used the word quiet. I began to think of neutrinos and dark matter as whispers, the most intimate messages of the universe's voice, carrying its closest secrets to ears that are all but deaf, or perhaps more accurately, immune, because it's so other-natured. With Earth itself as part of the instrument, underground labs simply receive. Designed into them is the knowledge that everything floats on the sea, and then there is the tank of water, and deep within it the core of transparent Exion. The method of an underground lab is less from too much. One feels that lovely lessening in spite of all the money and waiting for the smallest voice of the universe in the dark bigness, this amatonic sea of particles touching the smaller womb we have recognized our tiny Earth to be. The act of listening has been taken to another level. The concentration of attempting to find something outside of our own realm to prove a theory has found this particular astrophysicist enhancing the need of the stillness that is required for this job underneath the ground. Sound familiar? Perhaps character was established by this need, this obsession of listening, to find that intangible, unqualifiable thing. Even at the beginning, when the viewer was introduced to Hap, we find him in a crowded, loud underground subway with earplugs in. And then, further along the line, he opens his ears, enhancing it with headphones, listening intently with his controlled and underground lab environment. He has control over his environment to find that certain something. And when he does, he revels in it by listening to a YouTube clip of the Rings of Saturn. Not because it is a relaxing sound, but because it is connected to OA's NDE, and thus, he has had a breakthrough in knowing where his captors go when they die. Hap's invisible self is reveling in his bliss. His wants and desires of retaining this knowledge of years of attempts have paid off at the final hurdle. His invisible self is his wants and desires that he keeps to himself, and for what we know, he doesn't tell anyone except another scientist in the same field who eventually tries to kill him for his knowledge. It's tough to think about this type of human behaviour from a man who started these immoral experiments on human guinea pigs, but we must remember that he is human, therefore the concept of good and evil is not important. What is important is what man can stand in the pursuit of knowledge. This pursuit of knowledge for Hap is external. However, for an internal pursuit of knowing oneself, we could look at Steve and his journey of self. We find Steve to be an angry young man, attempting to maintain a visible self that is confident, cocky, and unaffected by the things around him, but his concentration of visible self has hidden his invisible self of his wants and desires. He is not expressing himself properly. Even in sex with Jay, a woman who is using Steve to get better at sex, Steve still wants someone to understand him, but the idea of asking or searching for someone is a struggling thing to comprehend. His anger, though seen as destructive, is a good thing to have. It is a stage of something where his anger musters action. If he were sad, perhaps, like BB-8 at the beginning, there is a sense of inability to move forward. Steve has anger, has action, and even though at the beginning it's directed in the wrong direction, the way comes along and puts him straight, without laughing, without contempt. Steve finds someone on his invisible self wavelength, and so his anger fuels his acceptance of finding someone out there that is seeing his true self, of both his internal and external self in action. And then, through this acceptance, he has a master of his emotions and finds his family, his tribe. This character development introduces a relationship between one's emotions and the meaning behind them, of opening up and encouraging discussion to the point of understanding oneself. One example that the directors and producers of the OA have found in their research is Upheavals of Thought, The Intelligence of Emotions, a 2001 book written by Martha Nussbaum, an American philosopher. She writes about the role of emotions playing in our thoughts using philosophy, psychology, anthropology, music, and literature. Martha argues that emotions are intelligent appraisals of a world that we do not control, marking a need for understanding and valuing the complex intelligence of emotions through everyday life and in trauma. She also presents a powerful argument for treating emotions not as alien forces outside of the body, but as highly discriminating responses to what is of value and importance. Within the OA, the movements require emotion and will only work if done with perfect feeling. This understanding requires an intelligence and an awareness of one's emotions to the point that it takes over throughout the movements and within the performer. Using the research from Martha, the OA series embarks on the importance of understanding one's emotions, whilst also going back and returning to movement, instinct and feeling, reacting to that gut feeling, or that sense of danger, to not ignore what our emotions, what our bodies are telling us. The movements within the OA, as well as various scenes, embark the viewer into a more intangible return to the intelligence of the body, of instinct and intuition, merging this artistic expression within performance and emphasizing that even now, in our reality, dancing, singing, moving of the body was seen as a sort of a communication dating back to the Neolithic age of man. It's always been there, this expression, this communication, but what has happened is that we have forgotten it. In the OA, we are reminded through this harmonious and repeated movements that embody breathing techniques that are performed by many, like a tribe, like a family that want to communicate through dimensions. The OA brings about many interesting elements from our reality, spawning a mix of science, religion, psychology and philosophy that break down into a more relatable and understandable storytelling. From the folklore and fairy tales that are remembered, their morals and dark undertones set the stage for a darkness within the story of the OA, emphasizing the struggles of bringing oneself into the light. The science-based research helped bring forth characters such as Hap and break the boundary of misunderstanding between the audience and the scientist, placing theories of science throughout the OA in bite-sized chunks, so the characters in the audience are learning within each episode. The religious aspect of faith is, as always, presented as an opposing force against science, much like Hap and the OA, but is blended within various realities, as neither have the spotlight, but both having the truth. But what drives the force on both sides in each character? Their emotions, their drive, their obsession. The research briefly touched upon here presents the show's producers and directors to have a broader sense of what should be shown. They have presented many ideas that are already done, however decided to go that bit further, to embark on giving something back, a sense of feeling for the audience. The introduction of the movements and their powerful involvement breaks the viewer/creator barrier and encourages others to think outside of the box, to feel inspired, enlightened, and even embark on a journey of self-discovery within one's own body and mind. True, the OA goes beyond realms of existence, but each viewer can do the same within their own bodies. There is nothing stopping the formation of friends and families that one can feel powerfully towards, or making their own tribe, and to go forth and to explore. As Brit Marling says, certainly it is really about constructing family with unusual pieces. Storytelling is a big part of stitching that fabric between people who might not otherwise talk to each other, people who sit at opposite ends of the cafeteria. If you enjoyed what was said, please follow me on Anchor, Spotify and other podcasting platforms for the latest episode, and be kept in the loop through my Instagram, at 2takes_podcast. If you want to help me in the making of each episode, there is a listener support platform that can benefit the levelling up of this podcast, as well as have you, the supporter, having access to extra content. Find this at anchor.fm/2takespodcast/support. And as always, thanks for listening.